I've played video games for years. Ever since I could actually hold a controller and knew what the buttons did, I was playing video games. And throughout all the ones I've played and own, none of them compare to that of the Assassin's Creed and Resident Evil franchises. But we aren't talking about my love for Leon and Resident Evil today.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
That is for another day. To clarify, I am a nerd. There is no denying that. One thing I've always loved learning about is history. Thankfully, I'm not that one kid every history class you has. You know, the ones I'm talking about, the literal human nerd emojis. But a game like Assassin's Creed was able to entice me because obviously a vast majority of the game takes place in the past. The historic setting and the interesting locations the game would take you to are some of my favorite qualities in video games I've played. I would often find myself invested in everything the games had to offer. Part of that may be because they love throwing side content in, like quests and collectibles, and it usually ends up with me saying to myself, I need to complete everything. Do I always complete everything? Let's just say in typical ADHD fashion, no. With a series that means as much to me as Assassin's Creed, I always get excited and end up loving these games, even when it turns out to be subpar. So with the release of Shadows approaching and with my pre-order already purchased, I figured it was a good time to rank the games from worst to best. I was originally going to include Freedom Cry, Liberation, and the Chronicles games in on this, but I figured I'd give each one a solo video or acknowledge them in future rankings, because believe me, I have more rankings ready, not just Assassin's Creed either. Now with ranking these games, I broke it down to 5 simple criteria. Gameplay, time period and historical events, story, modern and past, side content in the base game, the length and characters of it. Now, I may not address all 5 in every entry, but I assure you all of it goes into play in my rankings. And also, even if I rank it lower, I still have love for every game on this list, and I will try to remember to say good things about the lower ranked games. Number 13, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Okay, so, hear me out. I know people love this game, and don't get me wrong, this is a great game, but not a great Assassin's Creed game. This game takes the RPG style to the max with this one, adding in a ton of different attacks and buffs and practically eliminating all aspects or ideas of stealth, favoring combat. A couple things that irk me with the RPG style is you make choices in this game, which wouldn't be a problem if the Assassin's Creed franchise wasn't built on the premise of reliving your ancestors' memories. If we are reliving memories, why can we make choices and thus change history? This isn't an episode of Doctor Who.
Look, they gave me a badge with my name on in case I forget who I am.
The game's story, also on average, has taken players 42 hours, and that's not even with completing every side quest or every location you can. There's nothing wrong with a long game, I enjoy it personally, but there is way too much in this overhaul of things they added to the game. They also took the mythology aspect that was present in Origins up to 11. In this game, you fight a Cyclops, a Minotaur, and fucking Medusa. Yes, Medusa. Oh, and you can also solve the Sphinx's riddle outside of Thebes, but I'm actually okay with that one. Don't get me wrong though, fighting those creatures is fun, but this is an Assassin's Creed game, not one centered around mythology. If Ubisoft wants to do games with mythology, make a separate series. I'll still play those. And mythology can work in Assassin's Creed. For example, I think Origins' incorporation of mythology actually works to a great degree. In this game, however, it's almost too much. I haven't even mentioned the purpose of these side quests. It is literally to seal the gate to Atlantis, which for some reason Pythagoras, yes that's right, fucking a squared plus b squared equals c squared guy, is the guy who knows how to seal the gate. Another major issue I have with this game is the fact that it takes place 400 years before the prior installment, Assassin's Creed Origins. So why exactly after a game literally titled Origins, that tells us the origins of the Creed, does there need to be one before it? And also you have no hidden blade, you instead have the spear of Leonidas, because you're a descendant of him, because why wouldn't you be? Along with a story full of holes like Swiss cheese, bland-ass characters in Alexios and Cassandra, who, by the way, there's no point in picking one over the other because they both literally say the same lines in practically the same cadence. And speaking of lines, the voice acting in this game at times is awful. Fuka Yamagishi levels of awful. I rarely skip dialogue in Assassin's Creed games, but in this game I skipped almost all of it so the characters would shut up. but some things in this game are great. Even with the overhaul in combat, the combat is still fun. The concept of the territory wars was fun, where you could essentially get to pick a side in the Peloponnesian War and conquer territory for either Sparta or Athens. The naval combat is fun, but not as enticing as previous games. The part where you get to be in the Olympics is awesome, and being able to explore the beautiful country of Greece doesn't get tiring. But the truth is, this game just doesn't fit the Assassin's Creed style, so that's why it's at this spot. Number 12, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I was so hyped for this one after the trailers, but this one suffers from a lot of similar problems to Odyssey, which makes sense since it was released right after it. Valhalla had the same type of combat system, but actually tried to give us back some elements of stealth, which are varied in success, but better than Odyssey. This game also felt like an identity crisis. Is it trying to appeal to both old and new Assassin's Creed players? Worse, the whole world feels empty and most of the synchronization points just feel useless. And the locations you do get are quite bland most of the time. The objective just being searching for a chest that isn't hard to find. Some locations do have enemies like the islands you can raid with your ship crew, and those are actually great side activities to do. But this game, for as large as it is chock full of extremely repetitive side quests and locations that literally have no other purpose than to make the land look less empty. Another thing that is very annoying about this game is the combat skill tree. What is this? Why does it need to look so big and complicated for the most basic abilities? And while the combat and abilities are still fun with lack of much substance in the open world, you just get a tiny dopamine rush and then it's back to running around in East Bumblefuck. The story is also pretty meh. At least we get to see Desmond, kind of. While those issues bog down the game, the actual combat is fun. The world, as empty as it is, looks good. There's also randomly a Beowulf side quest, which I actually did this quest when I was in a Britlit class my senior year, and we read that book in that class, so that's kind of funny to me. But overall, while this game has its fun moments, there just simply isn't enough to save the overall experience, as this game still suffers from a lot of what Odyssey does. Number 11, Assassin's Creed Unity. Now, this one almost got last, but unlike the other two, it actually still fully feels like an Assassin's Creed game. First things first, Arno Dorian is a character I was never really able to connect with. Typically in Assassin's Creed, our main character goes through some sort of trauma that makes them turn to the Order. It's either showed through playable segments, flashbacks, or dialogue throughout that shows us how our characters are dealing with said trauma. But I just couldn't connect with Arno on this event. Arno also very much felt like an Ezio, but at home. This game takes place during the French Revolution, which certainly lends to the enjoyment of the game as it's an interesting setting. You meet some unsavory historical figures in Robespierre and some short guy. This game also had the only multiplayer campaign option in the franchise history, which was a massive flop. Multiplayer in Assassin's Creed is not something new to us, but the multiplayer modes in the past games were an actual non-story based multiplayer experience. This is another game where they focused more on combat than most other things, but the combat system in this one feels kind of clunky and overdone. This game also released at the same time as Rogue, sparking the only double game release this franchise has had. The double release was most likely a reason this game suffered though, feeling like it wasn't given enough time. As for the modern day storyline, it has now regressed down to you watching cutscenes, so that's boring. At least the Assassin storyline in the past can actually grip you somewhat in this game, and the DLC story pack Dead Kings gave you some extra fun things to do. The story in this game on average takes players about 16.5 hours, which I think is a really good length, so props there. But with how weak some aspects of this game are, that's not too long of a time to spend playing with it. But let's list some positive aspects of this game. First off, with Arno, no matter how bland he is still an assassin through and through, which is a strange positive point to bring up in a franchise called Assassin's Creed, but some games, even ones I put higher on this list, suffer from not feeling all that much like an assassin. This game also looks beautiful graphically. Paris, for once, looks great, and parkouring around the city is a really fun experience. And speaking of the parkour, this game also heavily innovated on all aspects of parkour. In the past, parkour has been mostly dependent on the terrain of the location, and we all have those annoying free-run moments where you accidentally jump too far and kill yourself. This game, I never had that issue though, and the parkour, which is still present in the games released afterwards, feels really smooth and is satisfying to run around while doing. The stealth in this game is also very intricate and not too hard or easy. And lastly, we all know about the glitches that plagued this game on launch. But surprisingly, Ubisoft actually went back and patched them, but the glitches will forever live on. Number 10, Assassin's Creed Mirage. This game was highly marketed as a return to form for the series, focusing more on stealth and getting rid of most of the RPG style aspects from the recent games. And considering I placed this above 2 of the 3 RPG style games, I think you can figure out that I think it worked. The leveling system and XP that increased your health and allowed you to face off against higher level enemies was completely gotten rid of, with every enemy being on the same level, just with different weapons, armor, equipment. Every area had actual places to go and sneak through, and you even have multiple options and paths to choose from to get to your target, which forced me to think of an optimal route to get to said target. Having to observe guards, patrols, and routes to find an optimal window rather than ooga booga, I Spartan kick you and only get 1 drachma for it. One of the major issues, though, is the main character. I never personally wanted to learn more about Basim, because personally I find him kind of boring, but I will say the story of this game did make me wonder how he became the person he turned out to be at the end of Valhalla. And as someone who sometimes enjoys longer games, this one is very short. Which is the same problem I have with Rogue, but I'll get to that later. The setting is also just okay. While Baghdad during when it was ran by the Abbasid Caliphate is a cool era of Baghdad's history, not much is really done with that, and compared to being able to do gang war in London or explore the Giza Pyramid complex, it was very underwhelming. And while I'm glad they are returning to form, the combat feels very slow paced despite it returning to earlier game style. Overall, this game feels far too short and lacking enough substance to justify a higher position. I also have this that my friend gave me, so there's that too. Number 9, Assassin's Creed Rogue. Rogue was released in tandem with Unity, and while it didn't suffer from the glitches and bugs Unity did, it suffered from many other aspects. Rogue doesn't really feel unique aside from the story. It really just feels like Assassin's Creed 3 and Black Flag had a child, which to me sounds great on paper, but in practice it didn't render very successful in the grand scheme of the franchise, especially when you compare it to the other mainline entries. Taking place during the 7 Years' War, this game tries to get us to see everything from the Templars side, which is a good contradiction and change of pace. Playing for the Templars did add more development for the overall story with us seeing how they operate, is what I would say if we actually did get to see how they operate, but we really don't. But however, in the past, we have seen how the Assassins actually do care for their fellow members of the Creed, and in this game, for some reason, all of them are made to be stupid and massive assholes, practically forcing our protagonist Shay Cormac to swap to the Templars. And you could argue it shows the Assassin's arrogance, but truly to me it feels like a plot contrivance to make Shay look more justified in swapping sides and his actions to follow. Assassin's Creed in the past, even when the story was weakened, they still always felt fleshed out. And while this game gave us more depth for the overall story, this game's individual plot feels more like an outline of an interesting story that's being pitched to like a film executive rather than a true cohesive narrative the player can actually get invested into. The story could have been very successful, and I may even have to make a more in-depth video on why I think this story failed to hit the marks it set out to do. A thing this game does do very well though is Shay himself. He does have some pretty good character qualities, and you can connect a lot with him as the story goes along. And you do get to explore the transition between sides with him and kind of what goes through his head. But if only the assassins you're leaving behind weren't so one-dimensional. The game focuses on building bonds with the characters in the first sequences, but they are made to be very unlikable from the start, so ultimately when you betray them, it doesn't really have the gravity that you think it would have. I think the part that makes me even more upset about the disservice to the Assassin's characters is one of my favorite characters in Assassin's Creed, Adewale, and this game even manages to ruin his character, making him look lazy and arrogant as well. And the modern day part of the story isn't any better, where you get to be an iPad kid walking around decrypting data files or whatever. But enough about the story of this game. I could go on and on. But another issue that I do have with this game though is the length. It is so short, spanning only 6 sequences that accumulates to an average story time of 10.5 hours, which is the shortest mainline entry in the series, which honestly makes it feel more like an added DLC than a standalone game. Now I think it's important that I say the parts of this game I do like, because I put this at 9. Like I mentioned before, the main character of Shay Cormac is very likable, and you connect with him and his journey. The stealth and combat is still fun, but nothing really innovates, because at this time it really didn't need to. I will say that for some reason, I actually found myself using the blowpipe a lot more than previous games, like shooting the sleeping darts, poison darts, whatever. And the game looks gorgeous, the settings are beautiful, and the level design is fantastic, so the gameplay still lends to a fun experience. The naval combat in this game is great too. Nothing can really beat Black Flag's system, of course, but this is a close second. But as we've learned from Odyssey, gameplay can't carry an Assassin's Creed game, so this is solidly at 9. Number 8, Assassin's Creed Revelations. The finale of the Ezio trilogy. Unfortunately though, like most trilogies, this one ends up being a subpar ending. Unfortunately, it couldn't be a Star Wars Episode 3. But even with being subpar, the game manages to do some things better than the previous Ezio games, and some things made worse. This game's story feels very loose, with Ezio looking for the Masyaf keys to access where Altair hid his apple, and then jumping to help free Constantinople. The stories never really feel like they flow together, which is unfortunate because you literally get to meet Suleiman pre-Onion Hat. It's very formulaic, which you can say about a lot of the earlier games, but it feels very disjointed and rushed. You do stuff in Constantinople, then head to Sofia to learn the location of the books to find the keys, which only connects at the very end of the story. The game also suffers from crashing issues no matter how good your console or PC is. The setting of Constantinople also just feels very bland, and it's a very small map. There's barely even any chests to find, and the whole economy system feels like a worse, more bogged down version of the predecessors. Something decently it does is the Brotherhood system. Like in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, you kill Templar captains at these towers to lessen their influence, and can then recruit civilians as trainees, and send them on missions to gain more money and XP. And what the new system does really well is the ability to set certain assassins as a den leader, and the den defense side missions are also fun. They also have a new variety of weapons and abilities that these recruits can do, but where the changes of the system falls flat starts in the Templar dens themselves. They are way too easy this time around. In Brotherhood, some of them provided a challenge for the player, whereas in this one you just easily storm in and completing it, removing the feeling of accomplishment Brotherhood possessed. There's also no risk when you call in your assassins. In Brotherhood, when calling in your assassins to help you fight a large group, those assassins could die. And when they did die, you almost felt a sense of guilt and responsibility for calling them in instead of just taking the group on yourself. Whereas in this game, if your assassin's health drops, they just get injured and need to rest, losing the penalty the previous game had. The game did do some things really well. The new bomb system was decent, being able to customize your bombs somewhat to be used for a distraction or to be lethal. The combat is still fun, and the new addition of the Janissary enemy provides almost a small mini-boss that you can't just easily kill when in combat. But most of all, what this game does great is in character development. A primary focus of this game is strengthening the relationships between Ezio and Altair, as well as Desmond and Subject 16. You also get to play as Altair post the first game and learn the depressing tale of his life afterward. And one of the coolest features, which I feel like a lot will miss, are the Desmond's Journey levels, where you learn about Desmond's upbringing and how he was found by Abstergo, which is how this whole series started in the first place. But despite all of this good, Revelations just couldn't overcome the subpar story and glitchy, bland gameplay. Number 7, Assassin's Creed Black Flag. I can already sense the anger for not putting this at number 1, but this game just isn't the best one because there are so many personal things I don't like with it. First off, Edward is not a true assassin. He is simply a pirate that stole one's clothes and therefore got roped into the conflict. I also personally prefer land-based Assassin's Creed gameplay, where you can sneak around and kill your target. And while this game still has plenty of that, much more of it is "Arg, I ram you with me ship." There also isn't much verticality in this game, which is a staple of Assassin's Creed, to the point where sync points don't seem important because I can see every bit of this town by standing on a fence. But back to the naval stuff, there are far too many scenes and fights that are based solely on that. The modern day story is another iPad kid adventure, and continued the downfall of the modern day story as it only ever got worse over the next few games. But this game does have fun combat when you actually get to be on land, and some of the boat encounters are fun. There's also cool treasure and stuff to be found. And the cities you go to are fun and cool as well. But that just simply cannot make up for the negatives that this game has for me. But hey, at least we got sea shanties. Number 6, Assassin's Creed 1. The game that started it all. Perhaps my nostalgia is impacting this game's placement, but let me explain. While the gameplay and mechanics like combat and stealth are a tad bit simple and outdated at this point, The simplicity is what makes this game still enjoyable today. Yes, the fetch quest type missions do get a little bit repetitive, but when you get to do an actual assassination, it makes it all worth it because there are some really fun and unique ones in this game. And the final boss battle against Al-Mualim is also a major highlight and a good twist. While the modern storyline is limited to a small set of rooms, this game sets up everything moving forward. It's like saying that Noctur and Toten is a bad zombies map because it was the first one. It's the building blocks for the series we have today. Altair as a character seems like the basic arrogant type right away, but as the story goes on, we see that even with his cockiness, he grows as a person throughout, even if his tone of voice doesn't change at all. And while the true payoff of Altair's growth isn't seen till Revelations, watching his journey from being a cocky guy that violates all 3 tenets of the Creed in the first few minutes of the game, to a guy who is loyal to the Creed and steps in to do the right thing when it calls for it is worthwhile. This game is also when they seem to actually care about the modern day storyline, setting up a clear vision for it, and it sets up the connection between why they go into the memories of someone's ancestor. And both stories feel equally important in this game, even if it's just wandering around a tiny office room and pickpocketing Lucy and Vidic to read their emails when they're not in the room. And the final encounter and battle is such a highlight too, learning that you've been helping the true villain the whole time. And the fight to take the apple from him was a great conclusion to the game that got me hungry to play the sequel. I also love how when you try to climb a ladder in the game, every citizen nearby is like, I don't see why he needs to be doing that. Number 5, Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Alright bruv, this next one takes place in England, but they don't score any fucking goals. Come on, England! Jokes aside, I personally think this game is great. This one is shorter, which I complained about in prior entries, but this one has good side activities like literal gang war with knives and swords, because this is London. You even get a DLC where you try and catch Jack the Ripper. You can also swim in the Thames and catch every disease, because there's literal human shit in it. Hey, that's something you guys in France have in common. Victorian London is overall a fun location, with distinct districts, and while each one has similar tasks before you fight the gang leader, they all feel unique and not repetitive. But side activities aside, what does drag this game a little bit is the main story and Jacob. The story is the Templar group wanting to find the Shroud of Eden, but the modern day story in this game is still watching cutscenes. I never thought I'd miss getting to walk to my bed for 2 seconds like the first game, but at least we get to see Sean actually doing field work. This game also features a dual protagonist system, and it actually works this time around. Kind of. Because like I said, Jacob is really boring in my opinion, but luckily Evie is pretty awesome, and I played as her every chance I could. And the two do have a believable sibling dynamic, and the sequences where we get to play as Jacob's granddaughter in World War I are great, and we even get to meet Winston Churchill. The music in this game also fucking bangs. Every game in this series has great music, but for some reason this one hits harder. So, shout out to Austin Wintory. Number 4, Assassin's Creed 3. Assassin's Creed 3 marks when the games hit their second big style change. But one big hurdle this game has is the beginning, with many people getting turned off at the beginning, and without saying too much, you play the first 3 sequences as Haytham Kenway, descendant of Edward. And the unfortunate part is Haytham is very bland as a character, so I see why people get turned off. But after sequence 3 is when the real fun begins, when you start playing as Connor. Connor is a much quieter but skilled character. He's well written, but for me isn't as likable as some of the other Assassin's Creed protagonists we've had. But that doesn't weigh this game down, as Connor is still enjoyable as our main character. That is kind of an overall problem with this game though. Many of the characters kind of felt flat throughout. You form minor connections with them, but it just wasn't executed as well as it could have been. The old ship mechanics feel clunky, but this was their first ship combat game, and the overall story really isn't too interesting. But one of the main drawing points is how fun the open world aspect is. Along with the combat, the open world gives you many areas to explore, as well as plenty of side content to play, like the liberation objectives in the cities. But my personal favorite is the peg-like artifacts and missions, especially the ones where you travel to places like the Bahamas to do a brief level to collect an artifact. Side content like this really elevates this game. Also, it should go without mentioning that this game taking place during the Revolutionary America is a very cool backdrop for the story and for the missions. You get to participate in famous battles and events from the Revolution. You literally get to participate in the Boston Tea Party, and it's one of the most fun events in this story. Finally, what helped put this game at this spot was the modern day storyline of it. This game gives you the most to do modern day wise, getting to go on actual missions, in the modern day and taking on Abstergo directly as Desmond because he has gained skill from reliving his ancestors' memories. And the conclusion of Desmond's arc in this game is a surprising and impactful ending in the series, but it also so far has marked the end of the modern day storyline being good. Okay, so not so fun disclaimer, during the recording of the gameplay for Assassin's Creed 3 and Assassin's Creed 2, I had to upgrade my computer, and my computer is now too powerful to run those games properly, so the next two entries are going to be made with cinematic trailers. Number 3, Assassin's Creed 2. If Assassin's Creed 1 is the groundwork for the series, Assassin's Creed 2 is where they hit the ground running, giving us a new setting and arguably the best protagonist in the series in Ezio Auditore. Ezio's defining moment is when his family is executed by their rivals the Pazzi, who are trying to take control of Firenze. Ezio is a character to easily connect with right away, at his core being a man who just wants to make sure his family's souls can rest. For me, while the game dragged a little bit in the portions in Venezia, Ghiaccio, I apologize.
But somehow Venice has replaced the real Venezia as the global standard. Like those stories, The Merchant of Venice and Death in Venice. Why? Call the damn book Death in Venezia! It's not that hard! Are we not good enough?
The ending brought it all back for me, as the build-up to it is worth it. What really makes this game great for me, though, is the amount of side content available in it. In the first game, all we had was the flags and Templars around the map, but in this game there's chests, feathers, glyphs, and not to mention all the paintings, clothing, and weapons you can buy in the shop. You can also upgrade businesses to help rebuild the family villa. None of this side stuff feels too repetitive or like a chore either, which the flags in the first game did at times. This game also does an amazing job at showing us how huge the Templar Order is and how wide their influence truly reaches. And while the story lags a tiny bit in the middle, it is still a good one, making sure to characterize Ezio well, and it allows us to follow his growth even more in the next two entries. Oh, and also there's this.
It's a me, Mario!
Number 2, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. If AC2 is where they start running, Brotherhood is their first gold medal winning race. This game is just absolutely amazing. Taking place in Rome, this game starts 4 years after the conclusion of 2. In this game you get to team up with Leonardo da Vinci, who is also in 2, and famous philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli, to stop a guy who thinks he's the son of God and brother to Jesus, which historically is more common than it should be. Shout out Hong Jiquan. The economic system from 2 is still in this one, along with the ability to rebuild the aqueducts. Trajan would be proud. Other open world activities include raiding the followers of Romulus hideouts, which when you get all of them done, you get the armor of Brutus. Yes, that Brutus. This game also introduced the saving and recruiting of assassins and the ability to send them on missions around the Mediterranean. And if you send one that's underleveled, they straight up die. And I even felt kind of bad about it. But besides the open world and side activities, the actual story of the game is much better than 2's. It never felt like it dragged at any point for me. And the part towards the end where you sneak into the Vatican is pretty awesome. This game also gives me my personal favorite Assassin's Creed moment.
Hey, what's the matter you, Altair?
That's racist.
You're racist.
The setting helps a lot, and we actually get to do stuff as Desmond in the open world for the first time. We don't have to just read emails or talk to Sean, even though I still recommend doing that because Sean is great. This game of course isn't perfect, with some occasional glitches, and after you do most of the side activities, the 100% really starts to drag on, with not much to do past that. And number 1, Assassin's Creed Origins. I may be a little bit biased here, as I absolutely love Ancient Egypt, owning a history book about it and a guide to the gods and goddesses. Not to mention, I even have a displate of this game above my monitors, where I'm currently sitting right now. Assassin's Creed Origins was the first game to do the newer RPG style, but didn't go over the top with it like Odyssey and Valhalla did. With an amazing open world, both visually and with the amount of things to do in it, I hardly ever fast traveled in this game because riding through the landscape camelback was genuinely worth it. And as for things to do, you had your usual liberate this area or search these chests. But what elevated this game's open world were the tombs. You entered a pyramid with your torch and did puzzles and parkour to reach either an ancient slate or an ancient mechanism. The ancient slate would give you an extra skill point, and the ancient mechanisms tell you more about the Isut, the first civilization. This game also contains one of the more easy to connect with characters in Bayek. His son Hemu was killed by the Order of the Ancients, early Templars, and the game is him, with the help of his wife Aya, hunting down members of the Order and avenging their son. There's also a really sweet side quest where you have to head to stone circles in the desert and align them with stars, and you get to hear dialogue between Bayek and Hemu where we see the father-son bond more, and it allows for a deeper connection to Bayek and helps us see how much love he had for his son. The combat also isn't too overly RPG and ability based, with each weapon having only one overkill ability that isn't game breaking and can definitely help in a tough scenario. The actual boss fights and assassinations are great in this game as well, giving a healthy mix of the two. The hyena boss fight in particular is a highlight for me, taking place outside the pyramids in a sandstorm. Finding the lizard is also a great assassination mission, as you have to use clues to figure out which Anubis priest is the correct one. This game also features a little bit of hope for the modern day story with the new protagonist Layla Hassan, and while in this game it's relatively contained, you still get to fight some Abstergo mercenaries, and Layla is likable enough to make those portions not a bore to sit through. We even see Desmond's dad again. Overall, I love this game for its setting, character, story, and combat. The additional DLC stories are also amazing, getting to explore the start of the Creed and fight some dead pharaohs. And that's my list. I want to clarify again that this is all my opinion. It's fine if you disagree. Unless you think Odyssey is the best, then I suggest you go get some help. All the music used in this video is going to be down in the description. I wanted to make sure that I found covers, obviously to avoid copyright. But I have a couple other ranking video ideas, and if you want to see those, click that fun little subscribe button and turn on the notifications if you feel so inclined. And if you disagree with any of my choices, let me know your reasoning in the comments below. But until next time, Messi is the greatest footballer of all time. Fight me.